This is Bob Oliphant from the Westford Historical Society and Museum, bringing you episode 49 of the Westford Wardsman podcast. The Westford Wardsman newspaper was part of Turner's Public Spirit, a weekly newspaper in Ayer a century ago. In this episode, we'll be reading the Wardsman for the week ending Saturday, December 5th, 1908. I'll elaborate on what was happening in Westford 114 years ago as we read. The first section in the December 5th, 1908 Wardsman was the About Town section. The WCTU, that was the Women's Christian Temperance Union, met on Tuesday afternoon at the new home of Mrs. Emery J. Whitney in the center of the town, 16 being present, and chose committees to plan and execute the work of the coming year. Preparations were made for donating a barrel of farm products to the Francis Willard Home in Boston, Mrs. H.G. Osgood to be the committee in charge. This organization endorsed the movement for school banks as an antidote against expenditure along the line of, quote, "I want a stick of candy," end quote. To encourage youth to be on the alert for the beautiful and hopeful, Mrs. McMaster and Mrs. Carkin were chosen a committee to solicit flowers. If this organization succeeds in encouraging improvement in any of the many directions of life, they will elevate and dignify values. The H.E. Fletcher Granite Company on Oak Hill are still the busy concern they have the reputation for being, and have been running a steam shovel for the past few weeks, clearing the surface of dirt and pebbles to enlarge the surface area of the quarry. The steam shovel is leased of the Boston and Maine Railroad. The daily expense to operate this shovel, including a gang of men to level at the dump, is much more likely to exceed $100 than to fall 5 cents below that amount. The annual banquet of the Congregational Church will be held in the vestry on Wednesday evening, December 16th. There will be toasts for the man and toasts and turkey for the frame that holds the man. The toast for the man will be locally original, humorous, edifying. If you believe in the value of laughter, come and get what belongs to you. If this doesn't fetch, then come and sit right down at this table of toast and turkey, and don't get up until you can't. If the temptation this presents does not invite thee, then music, both instrumental and chin, which, quote, hath charms to soothe the savage breast, end quote, will be brought to bear. That phrase was taken from William Congreve's 1697 play, The Morning Bride, which begins, Act 1, Scene 1, "Music hath charms to soothe the savage breast, to soften rocks or bend a knotted oak." Burton N. Cole, who trusts coal, it's Burton N. Cole, C-O-L-E, who thrust coal, C-O-A-L, into the fire on all extra freights on the Stony Brook Road, bought 15 cents worth of electricity in Lowell, where he resides, which had velocity enough to enable him to be a visitor in town last Sunday. What he's saying is that he took the 15-cent electrical trolley from Lowell to Westford. He was the guest of George H. Hartford. Mr. Cole will be remembered as having lived here several years ago. As fireman on freights for several years, he has handled coal without gloves and is now prepared to handle the throttle valve. That is, he's going to become an engineer. A bank in Montreal is searching for values in the celebrated Brookside Park near Graniteville. That's probably supposed to be valuables. Have patience, dear bank. Just at present, its sidewalks are underwater and its streets are in the air. Besides, it is not the season for its other values to be on exhibition. Frogs, mosquitoes, and water snakes having gone into winter quarters. Besides, just at present, there are more owners than land. Wonder who will pop up next and lay claim to ownership. It is about time for the Bank of England to be laying claim to this paper park. I'm not sure what the reference is to the Bank of Montreal. examining Brookside Park near Graniteville. I think Brookside Park was a proposed housing development in that area. Maybe they were helping fund it. Last Sunday at the Unitarian Church, Reverend and Mrs. Benjamin H. Bailey and Abiel J. Abbott were chosen delegates to represent the parish at the installation of Reverend Edwin Evans at the Unitarian Church at Ayer, Friday evening, December 4th. It was common for representatives from neighboring churches to attend the installation of a new pastor in the area. John Adams Taylor was one of the 8 seniors at the Emerson College of Oratory who recently appeared in a public recital in Chickering Hall, Boston. John was one of the 2 sons of Samuel L. Taylor, author of the About Town section that we're reading right now in the Westford Wardsman. Hear ye, for this will be the last hear ye, for the West Chelmsford mixed up, dramatic, emphatic combination will appear in both Westford and Chelmsford, same night, same hall, same hour, Wednesday evening, December 9th, Marshall's Hall. There will be 40 actors. They will be admitted first. Then, if the hall isn't full, another person can come in. Marshall's Hall was reputed to be right on the line in between Westford and West Chelmsford in what we now call the Nabnasset area. A new waiting station has been built at Taylor's Crossing at the junction of Stony Brook and Lowell Roads. The architects and contractors were James H. O'Brien and John A. Taylor, aided by the traveling public and most everybody else who thought they knew enough about woodwork designing to drive a nail. This has been built since the public declaration has been issued toward discontinuance. Some folks go right along just as though they couldn't hear or wouldn't obey injunctions. By the will of the late Samuel M. Hutchins, $2,000 was left to the Chelmsford Street Baptist Church, Lowell, $2,000 to the Baptist Church, South Chelmsford, and $1,000 to the Congregational Church, Westford. The funeral of Samuel M. Hutchins, who died in Lowell last week, took place from the Chelmsford Street Baptist Church in that city Friday afternoon. Reverends A.E. Kenyon and G.E. Tompkinson officiated. The former very appropriately referred to the ready response and liberality of the deceased toward church and charity work. The church quartet added fitness to the occasion with appropriate music. Burial was in Fairview Cemetery, Westford. Mr. Hutchins was nearly 67 years old and a native of Carlisle. Besides a widow, he leaves one brother, Miles Hutchins, and one sister, Mrs. Wallace Woodward, both of Dorchester. He was for many years a resident of Westford, having married Miss Ann L. Snow for his first wife, living at the Snow homestead. That was the farm that was located right across the street, across Main Street from Fairview Cemetery, which later was the home of the Hicks Building Company. She was living at the Snow homestead, where he was a successful farmer, making the raising of hay a specialty. For many years, by authority of the selectmen, he had charge of Fairview Cemetery. He was a veteran of the Civil War and member of the Veterans Association of Westford. To this patriotic organization, he was loyal at all times, and on Memorial Day and Decoration Day, he was especially loyal to, quote, "attention company," end quote, by always being in the marching ranks. He was possessed with sociability and generosity that was never on the corner of the street for display and shunned housetop advertisement, but contented itself to follow the ancient advice to conduct, quote, "let not thy right hand know what thy left hand doeth," end quote. That's from Matthew chapter 6, verse 3. The Electric Road is the name of the next section. The old and familiar saying, quote, "a clap of thunder out of a clear sky," end quote, startled the inhabitants of Westford when they read in the Westford Wardsman under Ayer News last week the declaration of an attempt to discontinue the running of the branch line from Brookside to Westford of the Lowell and Fitchburg Electric Railway. It is safe to say that the effect of disclosing this proposition was to make everyone affected by the proposed change adopt the fighting motto of Andrew Jackson, "not by the eternal." In the communication, The history of the building of this road was given in part, but some important facts bearing upon the cost of constructing this road were omitted, which have a bearing upon determining whether the people of Westford are sinners above all others on the line of the road and causing a load of debt for the company to lug. Why not tell the public that when Mr. Farnham sold out his project to A.L. Register and Company, the said Farnham was put in head general to superintend the construction of the road at a salary based on the cost of constructing the road? Are the people of Westford to be made to suffer because a premium was offered to have the road cost more than was necessary? Why not tell the public that the town of Ayer had long wanted a new street laid out, part of the way through an expensive ledge, that they compelled the Lowell and Fitchburg to build this street or get out of town, when in equity the town should have borne half the expense? Must the people of Westford have the rails ripped up under their feet that have been laid there by a legal agreement because the town of Ayer was too smart for somebody and thereby increased the cost of construction? Why not tell the public that in the town of Groton, the road was built on the rocky and expensive side of the highway and could have been built for less than half on the opposite side? Must the people of Westford walk 2.5 miles to Brookside to take the cars because somebody didn't have judgment to construct on the comparatively inexpensive side of the highway? Must the people of Westford be singled out for deprivation because A.L. Register and Company are such a sharp firm that when they bought out Farnham and his legal agreements, they didn't know that a spur track was to be built for Westford? Funny, isn't it, besides being queer? That was kind of a rant by Mr. Taylor. Now then, to increase the revenues by making a 6-cent fare on the entire line would be a gross injustice to the traveling public from Ayer to North Chelmsford. Of course it would. It would come pretty near being inhuman. But to saddle all the financial mismanagement and extravagance in building this road upon the legal claims of Westford to car service and let all others free from sharing this burden by a 6-cent fare is equity. Of course it is. Everybody knows equity. Quote, "Ye do strain at a gnat and swallow a camel," end quote. And that's a quote from Matthew chapter 23, verse 24. The next section is the Westford Center section. Mr. and Mrs. Henry M. Wright and Livingston, that's their son, Livingston Wright, have spent several days at N.H. Wright's recently, including Thanksgiving. Mrs. Daniel Atwood and the three Mrs. Atwood drove to Chelmsford and enjoyed Thanksgiving Day with the Elliot Atwoods. That was a brother of the Mrs. Atwoods. Notwithstanding her 87 years, Mrs. Atwood enjoyed the outing. Aside from deafness, she enjoys quite uniformly comfortable health. Mrs. Lizzie Hamlin and daughters spent Thanksgiving with relatives in Gardner, the Julian Camerons with relatives in Brookline, and Principal and Mrs. Woodward with relatives near Boston. A welcome Thanksgiving guest came into the home of Mr. and Mrs. Frederick A. Fisher of Lowell on that day when a little daughter named Lois was born to them on November 26th in Lowell. Members of the Congregational Church are sorry to hear of the death of Samuel M. Hutchins at his home in Lowell. During his residence in Westford, he was a regular attendant of this church and a good friend of it. He gave the handsome memorial window in memory of his first wife, Louisa Ann Snow, who died on Christmas Day, December 25th, 1892 in Westford. And other gifts of his to this church were the sum of $100 and the substantial clock in the auditorium. Members of the Tadmuck Club will bear in mind the change of date from December 8th as given in the calendar to December 15th at the Congregational Vestry. Some fine outside talent has been secured for this musicale, and the members may expect a real treat. The Tadmuck Club is, of course, the ladies' club in town. Chickenpox has been and is prevalent among the children in town. Sunday morning, being near the 300th anniversary of the birth of Milton, Mr. Marshall will take for the subject of his sermon John Milton the Puritan. The English poet John Milton, who he's speaking of here, was born December 9th, 1608 in London and died there on November 8th, 1674. He is best known for his poem Paradise Lost. Frances, the little daughter of Mr. and Mrs. John P. Wright, has scarlet fever. Fortunately, it is a mild case. She is quarantined with a trained nurse. Miss Ruth Fisher has been confined to her home this week with tonsillitis. Mrs. Charles L. Hildreth has been substituting at the school for her, reviving her successful teaching days. The Boys Club of Mr. Marshall's, the Knights of King Arthur, held a successful meeting at the vestry Tuesday afternoon. There were 15 present and 5 new members were initiated into the mysteries of the order. At present, the membership numbers 18. 1908 was just a few years before the Boy Scouts were formed, and Mr. Marshall was essentially creating a Boy Scout group that he called the Knights of King Arthur. The Ladies' Missionary Society and the weekly prayer meeting held a joint service at the vestry Thursday afternoon, and Mr. Marshall gave an interesting talk about Martin Luther. The doings of some of our dumb creatures is sometimes as interesting to many as those of humankind who are credited with the monopoly of reasoning power. Alfred O. Davis on the Leland Road has a cat which he found one day this fall with a family of kittens. They were about a week old, and in the nest of the hay, the mother cat had gathered 3 baby gray squirrels, and also coiled up was a good-sized snake, which was badly mutilated on the back, but still alive. Mr. Davis disposed of the snake, and not wishing to keep the kittens, he disposed of them, thinking the squirrels could go, but the cat, instead of killing them for game, as she undoubtedly would have done for their kittens had she had them, promptly adopted them and nourished and cared for them in true maternal cat fashion. They have grown very fat and sleek and tame, and are an interesting sight to see. If young kittens are spry, young squirrels are more so, and many times their foster mother finds them quite a handful with their antics. Mr. Davis has petted them a great deal, and always having been in captivity, they are very tame, not running away when they have opportunity. One of their various stunts is to run up their master's coat and drop nuts down his collar. He enjoys his pets, but expects any day some neighboring cat will not wish to adopt them, but make a meal of them instead. Mrs. John C. Abbott, with a mother's heart so big that she is interested in the welfare of all the children, has been busy for some time arranging the details of a plan that was tried for the first time Monday of providing each noon hot chocolate or soup for children at the new school building. That's the Frost School in Westford Center. Many who come from long distances in the school barges and are away from home a good many hours, and with the cold lunches brought from home, supplemented with a hot chocolate or soup, will be alternated each day. The soup will be varied with rice, macaroni, barley, croutons, etc. to make it attractive. Each child provides his own cup and spoon. Mrs. Samuel Hamlin prepares this nourishment, and it is transferred piping hot at the noon recess. About 60 children are served, and Mrs. Abbott's thoughtful kindness and generosity is very genuinely appreciated by all concerned. The next section is the Graniteville section. Mr. and Mrs. John Loftus and family, who have made their home in this village for many years, removed all their belongings to Lowell on last Saturday, where they will make their home in the future. The Loftus family are well and favorably known and have many friends here who wish them every success in their new home. Mr. Loftus is at present confined to St. John's Hospital, Lowell, with a serious stomach trouble. Daniel W. Harrington is now confined to his home with an attack of throat trouble. His position as butter and cheese salesman is being temporarily filled by Edward Riney. A daughter, Alice, was born to Mr. and Mrs. Timothy A. Riney on Monday, November 20th. The Ladies' Aid Society of the Methodist Church met with Mrs. Wesley O. Hawks on Thursday afternoon when plans were discussed for the coming fair. Many people from this village will attend the dramatic performance to be given by the Village Improvement Society in West Chelmsford Wednesday evening, December 9th. The residents of Westford Center are very much disturbed over the street railway question, for the management of the Lowell and Fitchburg Company have practically decided to discontinue running that part of the branch line from Brookside to Westford Hill, owing to lack of patronage. Timothy D. Riney is confined to his home in this village with injuries to his back and foot sustained while attending to his work a few days ago. He is now able to get about with the assistance of crutches, but it will be several days before he can resume his usual employment. Business still continues to be good in the mills and shops here, and everything points to a very prosperous winter. The next section is Forge Village. A case of scarlet fever has appeared in our village, a child of a Polish family on Central Street. It is hoped it will not become an epidemic. John Sullivan had a finger broken last week while attending to his duties as fireman for Abbott and Company. That's the news in Westford for the week ending December 5th, 1908. Thank you for listening, and thanks to Nick Woodbury of Westford Cat for providing technical support. You can find transcriptions and podcasts from the Wardsman at our website at museum.westford.org, or visit the Historical Society's Facebook page for more Westford news from a century ago. This is Bob Oliphant, and I hope you will join us for next week's Westford Wardsman podcast. Thank you.